Okay, go.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. For those who may not know me, my name is Paul Walsh. My pronouns are he, his, and him, and I am a member of the Diversity Committee at St. James United Church in St. John's. On behalf of our chair, Hannah Shepard, who is in meetings today, she's a member of the Canadian military, and our entire committee, thank you very much for joining us today. I want to start by reading the mission statement of St. James because I think it's really important in regards to what we're doing here today. And the people of St. James United Church are eternal seekers who value diversity within our congregation, our city, and all of society. We affirm each person's uniqueness and believe that all persons deserve to be valued, treated with equity, and respected. We are all children of God, walking many paths of spirituality. Further, we proudly and publicly declare our commitment to practice radical hospitality and strive in every way to provide a safe and supportive place for all persons to participate in the worship and work of our church. Guided by the teachings of Jesus, we embrace all persons, regardless of creed, race, age, ability, economic status, cultural and ethnic background, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, or any other difference that has led to marginalization or oppression. We're here this morning to talk about two areas that in society has led to both marginalization and oppression, and that's the concept of ageism, which is discrimination on the basis of age, and ableism, discrimination in favor of able-bodied persons. And I am thrilled to be joined by five very good friends on this panel. So I'm going to go around and introduce them, and I'm not picking any order. They're basically the order that they appear on my screen at the moment. The first person is Meg Biz, who is the peer support volunteer and the acting outreach coordinator with Seniors NL. The second is Paul Grimes, who is the manager of ethics and pastoral care with Eastern Health and works out of the Pleasant View Towers complex. David Peters, sociologist and good friend from university days, and we've had many a conversation on this and many other topics over the years. Lewis Andrews, the vice chair of L'Arche Avalon, and who am I forgetting because they're gone off my screen?
Well, you're forgetting.
Oh, there she is. She's over in the corner, and only a person I've known for, I don't know, 12, 15 years longer. Nancy Reed, the incredible executive director of the Coalition of Persons with Disabilities, and the lady who heads the network of disability organizations in this province. So our purpose is to talk a little bit. I'm going to ask each one of the panels just to talk from their own lived experience about implicit and explicit bias, both in terms of ageism from Meg's and Paul's point of view, and from perspective of disability from Lewis and Nancy's and my own point of view. And then I'm going to ask Dave to sort of sit and sort of summarize what he's hearing, and then maybe we can all have a chat and a Q&A. So there's nothing very formal here. It's just really a passing on of information. And it's within the context of a faith community. And it's interesting when you look at, and for Paul Grimes' benefit, Paul was my professor at Queen's last semester, so I'm actually using two papers I wrote from you to draw a few quotes. So if they sound familiar, Paul, forgive me for that. But there were some biblical quotes I used in some papers I did for Paul. And it's interesting when you look back on age and disability, because age in the Bible gets a really good billing. There's a quote from Job that in old age is wisdom and in length of days is prudence. Disability, not so much. Disability, there's a whole thing called disabling theology that people were either considered, who are disabled, were either considered divinely blessed or damned. Both the Old and New Testament, Leviticus talks about if you are blind or lame or mutilated, or if you have a limb too long, I would qualify for that, broken foot or a broken hand, that you weren't allowed to enter the temple. In Luke, it says Jesus was quoted as saying, which is easier, say your sins are forgiven, or to say stand up and walk, as if to say a disability was because you'd sinned. And I heard that when I was a young boy, that people supposedly of faith, wondering if, did my parents sin that caused them to have a child with a disability? So it's not always been a welcoming place for those of us with disabilities. We talk all about, welcoming. I mean society, welcoming people from all differences, and then we impose social norms, and we expect people to be quiet or expect them to sit in their place, or if you happen to be a chair user, somebody who uses a wheelchair, if you come into a church, well, there's your 2 designated spots. Everybody else can sit wherever else they want. Just when you think about it, is very segregationalist and very discriminatory. And these movements, and can't speak to ageism, at least not yet, because I don't know enough about it. But in terms of the disability movement, these are social justice movements drawn out of the great social justice movements of the past century, and so long of the social justice around civil rights in the United States and for persons of color, and also from the feminist movement. And many of us in the disability community tie the beginnings of the social justice movement for disabilities to the Latimer decision here in Canada. So that's the 2 specifics that we want to talk about. So I'm going to do one person talk a little bit about ageism, then go to disability. I will, is it right to say, warn Lewis and Nancy that I may interject and say my own couple of pieces about disability, just because it's my world too. So I'm going to start, if I may, with Meg, and just to talk a little bit about her experiences at her work at Seniors NL.
Thank you, and I'm really glad to be here, and nice to meet all of you. As a peer support volunteer with Seniors NL, I spend my time connecting seniors with access to information and resources that improve the quality of their life. Seniors NL, I'm not sure if you're all familiar with it. It's a non-for-profit organization, and it's dedicated to promoting the independence and well-being of older adults. It's not an advocacy organization, more about connecting seniors and their loved ones with information that they might need. I also have quite a bit of lived experience as a caregiver on multiple cases, but for my mother who had Alzheimer's, for my father who had a health file that was approximately 12 inches deep. And so we spent, and I had to do it long distance because they were in Ontario and I was here. I would say that for me, from my perspective, and I've done a lot of work on this and speaking on it, is that I think ageism is one of the most significant and one of the most debilitating biases in our society right now, as it relates to seniors. And I won't get into definitions of it unless you want me to, but the word ageism has been around for 50 plus years. But it's really only this year that it seems to be taking a forefront. So over time, it has grown, but it was only last year that the World Health Organization launched their global report on ageism. So over the course of these 50 years, ageism has crept slowly and now not so slowly into our lives. Based on research, it's probably one of the most tolerated forms of discrimination in Canada. There's some research in Canada that quantifies that 80% of Canadians believe that seniors 75 years of age and older are seen as less important and more ignored than the younger generations. The thing about ageism, and this is maybe the implicit side of it, is it's sneaky. And much like any other ism, it pervades institutions and it pervades sectors of society without us even really knowing. And a couple of them that are pretty heavily ageist, if I may say, includes healthcare and social care. And one would think maybe that wouldn't be the case, but the reality is that it is very much the case. The media, obviously, the legal system. There's one of the things in my previous life, I was a marketer, and there was a lot of research involved. The very interesting thing that's happening now is that seniors are being excluded from research that is being done and data collection efforts, largely because of technology and not being able to participate with all of the technology that goes on. But if you're excluded from the research, that means that your information and what you need is excluded from the statistics and data that is defining policies. I'm sure none of you are unfamiliar with this. So seniors are being increasingly excluded from places like that as well. COVID has really obviously brought this out of the shadows, into the forefront, particularly when we hear about what's happening, for example, largely more so in provinces such as Ontario. But even just last week at Seniors NL, the government, so with the Omicron, I know I pronounce it wrong, the governments their phone line was being inundated by people calling to find out where they could get a booster shot. And the government actually said, so please stop calling our phone line to find out where to get a booster shot because it's being inundated and other things are not happening. Unfortunately, that excludes instantly a section of society that doesn't have the internet, but all of the information exists there. So our entire week last week was dedicated to helping seniors find booster shots and clinics at the same time. So it was a really forefront example for me. Ageism has actually quantitatively been proven to shorten lifespans. The average is 7 years. With enough ageism, you can actually live 7 years less long than without it. It results in poorer physical and mental health. It slows recovery from disabilities and or hastens cognitive decline. These are all quantitatively proven. It also increases the risk of elder abuse, which is already at approximately 1 in 6 elders who are at risk for elder abuse. So that's I find that a little scary. It has absolutely pervaded the workplace, and increasingly is having a very real impact because it depends on how you define age. Seniors at Seniors NL, we allow people to define it, self-define it, but the reality is approximately 55 plus. But there's a lot of seniors who are looking to continue to work past 65 as well. This is having a real impact on people's ability to afford the basics, let alone perhaps some of the pleasures in life that others can afford. And where I think this really applies here is that when ageism interacts and intersects with other isms, such as ableism, racism, and or sexism, the effect is compounded. And it makes the effects of ageism on health and well-being even worse. What concerns me the most for us in Newfoundland is that we are a perfect storm for ageism. Our province is aging 4 times faster than the rest of Canada. We have longer life expectancy, but we have the lowest fertility rates in the country, the highest rates of out-migration, very low rates of immigration and retention. And the out-migration are people who, if I may dare say so, are taking their uteruses with them so that we're not actually having the birth rates that we would have as well. And I'm not sure, I don't know if we, which includes our institutions in Newfoundland and Labrador, are aware of the extent of ageism and or are preparing for its current impact and future impact. On a positive note, and I'll end it on this, there is growing awareness and there is growing discussion around ageism. And because ageism is technically each and every one of us hurting our future selves, everyone has a vested interest in it. So I'll end on that note.
Thank you, Meg. Terrific summary and terrific use of statistics. And when we talk about our population aging, we don't realize the effect that has and the fact that so many younger people are leaving. Well done. Lewis, can I talk to you? I'm going to move over to the disability side now and ask your thoughts on ableism and your own experience and some of the work that you do. You're muted, Lewis.
Can you hear me now?
I can indeed.
Okay. Let me know if my voice goes. I have some problem with my connection where I'm sitting, so I may have to move to another part of the house. Just let me know if that's the case. Thank you for the invitation. I really wasn't quite sure what I should say or how I should say it, but so I guess what I'm doing is some of our personal experience living with somebody who has a severe intellectual disability, and some of the things that we see in society as we go from day to day. Let me introduce myself and my family quickly. I'm Lewis. I'm a retired lawyer. My wife is a retired nurse. We had 3 sons. Our oldest son, Brad, lives in California with his wife and his 2 daughters, our 2 granddaughters, who are 13 and 10. Mark is our middle son. He's 42. He's severely disabled, intellectually disabled. And our youngest son is Todd. He and his wife and 3 grandchildren live in Grand Falls, Windsor. He has a son, our grandson, who's 9, and there's 2 almost 5-year-old twin granddaughters. Mark, as I say, is significantly intellectually challenged. He was diagnosed with tuberous sclerosis very shortly after birth, and he has a seizure activity as well as aggressive behavior and anger outbursts as part of his condition. I guess in order to better understand, Mark would function at maybe a 1 or 2 year level with limited vocabulary and limited activity. He could be fun at times, but more often than not, it's a challenge with respect to his behavior. When Mark was younger, we used to take him to church. We belonged to the Salvation Army Citadel on Adams Avenue, and we used to take Mark to church. He was involved in a lot of the day program there in the morning when we had Sunday school and whatnot. Well, like with later life, some people looked at him with some interest or inquisitive mind. Others steered as far away from him as possible. And there were some who tried to involve him as much as possible in the program. And Mark continued in church with us for a number of years. There would be outbursts. He'd be sitting in church and suddenly he might just shout out, "Hallelujah." Or he'd be sitting in church and he'd start waving his arms or something, shout. Most troublesome for most people around us was when in church he had a seizure, which meant that people didn't really know how to react. And some reacted by running away, some others by looking, very few by trying to assist, maybe because they didn't quite know what to do. And over time, his involvement with church has diminished. He's 42, believe it or not, he's middle-aged now, and so he's often more content to sit at home. Trying to say something about Mark's involvement in the community, I guess, as I thought about it, I thought the easiest way to do it was to use some examples of our own family, our immediate family, the 2 granddaughters, the twin granddaughters in particular, because I think it's like a microcosm of society, the things that we see that have happened over time. One of our granddaughters, Lily, is apprehensive, if not afraid of Mark. When she comes to the house, she sort of looks at him, she backs up, and she makes sure that she stays away from him most of the time. She keeps her distance, and she runs when he shouts, gets angry, or when he has a seizure. On the other hand, Kate, who is the same age, is interested in Mark and always wants to be around him. When we FaceTime with Todd and his family in Grand Falls, Windsor, Kate calls out to Mark and always wants to see him on the screen and talk to him. In a conversation this morning with my wife, Marilyn, she reminded me of her recent FaceTime discussion with our 2 granddaughters. In the call, Lily asked that we come to visit them at their home in Grand Falls, Windsor. Lily then said, "But don't bring Mark." Kate spoke up and said, "I want Mark to come with you." She then said, "He can sleep in my bed." When Kate visits in person, she always wants to hug Mark before she leaves to go home. And she does so even if he's not receptive. She goes around the room to hug each one of us, and she will not leave until she can get into Mark and give him a hug. Lily, on the other hand, keeps her distance and will wave from the doorway as she goes. I think that's an indication of society as a whole in many ways. There are people who are very uncomfortable, find it very difficult to deal with people with intellectual disabilities. There are some others who want to, and maybe just don't know how to do so. that leads me to one point which may explain why some people are concerned about Mark or concerned about being around Mark. One thing with Mark, and I suspect it's the case with most people with intellectual disabilities, he doesn't like people, in particular strangers, to invade his personal space. For some reason, people feel they have to get up very close to Mark's face to speak to him. So they may be 12 inches, 24 inches away from him when they want to just say hello. And Mark inevitably will either growl back at them because they're invading his space, or will reach out to grab at them. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's so much he doesn't like them to be around as he just doesn't like his personal space invaded, as most of us would. How many of us, when we go to speak to someone, walk that close to their face to say hello? It's a way that people react, and quite frankly, I'm not sure why. Another interesting example of the way people deal with Mark, or people like Mark, we have a worker who looks after Mark, Adrian, a wonderful man who comes and takes him daily and looks after him. And he came home one day to tell us about an experience at the Avalon Mall. Lars Avalon, and I may tell you a little bit about that at the end if we have time, would go to the Avalon Mall every Thursday and have lunch at the mall. So the parents or workers, together with those with intellectual disabilities, would gather in the area of the mall and have lunch together. And this was a time when I think Adrian was there with Mark, but not many others were present. And as he's wont to do, Mark shouted a couple of times, or maybe got angry. I'm not sure what it was. Maybe he had a seizure. I'm not sure. But whatever the reason, one of the other patrons there having lunch called over one of the security guards and said, "He's making too much noise. He's bothering me. Would you please go and ask him to move somewhere else?" Luckily, the guard, bless his soul, I wish I knew him or could meet him, said, "No, if he's bothering you, if you don't like it, you move somewhere else." And that was, for us, that was meaningful, that someone understood that Mark was as important as the other lady, and that he was entitled to be there. Another example is the Irving Big Stop in where it is now, the name of the street, but we all know where it is. I mean, most of us have gone there, I'm sure. And Mark goes in there with his worker, either for breakfast or for lunch many days. And like I said, with other places, many people stand back and give him a wide berth to get down through and don't quite know how to react to him. But there's a lady that works there. She's one of the waitresses. And when Mark comes, and when Mark knows that you're not afraid of him or that you're okay with him, he reacts differently. And she takes Mark's hand and they walk together to the table. And she will often take a break so that she can go over and sit with Mark while he's eating his breakfast. That's the side that we've got to get more of. That's the side that we've got to see the community deal with in terms of people like Mark. I know these are really examples of a microcosm of society. Many don't know, or don't want, or don't know how to act or react to people like Mark. It may be easier when people have a milder disability, but I think overall, people just don't know how to react and find it easier to move away, stay away, or just not get involved. In my view, at least, as a society, we need to better understand those with intellectual abilities. We need to understand how to interact with these people and how to integrate them into the community. I believe we will all be better for it. One last 2 minutes, if I would, just to briefly introduce you to Lars Avalon. Lars is an international movement. It's throughout the world. It's in all provinces of Canada, except Prince Edward Island. We in Newfoundland have a community, but we don't yet have large homes. And the main goal of Lars is to build homes for permanent housing for adults with intellectual disabilities. My wife and I are now over 70. We will not be able to look after Mark forever. It's been 42 years with a lot of difficult times. Some people tell us that Mark would maybe do better living with others his age in another setting. But we're concerned, as are a lot of people, with respect to what happens when the parents can no longer look after these children. So Lars hopes to be able to build 2 houses. We're acquiring land in Pleasantville, where we hope to build 2 houses that will house 4 intellectually disabled people together with a number of assistants who live in. So it becomes a surrogate family, a family replacing the family that Mark now has, somewhere where he sits around the table with surrogate brothers and sisters. They eat meals together. They celebrate birthdays together. They mourn losses together. They spend their evenings listening to music or whatever a family would do. And we're hoping in the next couple of years that Lars will be able to get those 2 homes built. We hope then that the larger community will understand what Lars is all about, that the community will know that these people, are part of our society. They should be brought in and do things with the rest of the people. We hope that we'll be able to be visible in the community. That someday we'll be able to sit out on a deck somewhere and have coffee with Toronto Maple Leaf mugs, or just to be out, and people will stop and say hello. I've had the experience to go to Wolfville, Nova Scotia, where there's been a large community now for quite a number of years. And some of their people with disabilities are able to do things such as candle making or weavery. They do these things. They have a storefront where they sell them. They have people in the community who come and meet with them. They take the disabled people out to the gyms or other places to walk around and whatnot. And I think we need to do all that here in St. John's. And I think our community as a whole, we will be much better for it if and when we do it. So Paul, I don't know if that's the kind of thing you expected. If not, I apologize, but and I hope I didn't go on too long. So thank you very much.
Not at all. It's more than I expected. First of all, thank you for sharing some very personal elements of your family and your experience. I know Mark. I've got to meet him a number of times, and many of the members of the L'Arche Avalon community. It strikes me, and most people on this call know that in my professional life, I work for the Autism Society. The similarities between some of the challenges that you mentioned for those with intellectual disabilities and many of the challenges faced by those with autism and neurodiversity in general, in terms of the general acceptance within society, because they may not act with the same social norms that are expected. And that story in the Avalon Mall, rings really true for, I would know it would ring true for many of the parents and members of the Autism Society. And again, for all those in the neurodiversity community. I have a great love and a long-time love of the L'Arche movement. And one of the biggest challenges within neurodiversity and within the intellectual disability community coming forward is residential options and residential care. And our provincial government is trying to do a residential review right now. But the fact that we can't outlive our children puts many parents, and you're one of them, Louis, in the position of, well, what are my options? And I know, because I deal with parents not daily but regularly at the Autism Society, who are in the very similar position, and they say, where are our options? There are few. There are really, really few, and L'Arche represents a tremendous philosophical approach to that. So thanks for sharing that very much.
Thank you.
I'm change back to ageism now and ask Paul Grimes to speak from his experience and his work at Eastern Health. And I should say, for anybody who doesn't know, Paul and I met each other last semester. Paul taught me a course on older adults and pastoral care for older adults at Queen's College. And from that experience, I wanted him to be part of this panel.
Thank you, Paul. Good to see you again. And nice to meet all of you virtually this morning. My short answer on ageism is that I think Meg did a great job of summarizing it, and I agree with everything she said. I could leave it at that if you want. My longer answer, I have been involved with Eastern Health now for 10 years. And currently, in my current role, I do oversee long-term care, which includes Pleasant View Towers, which has 460 residents on most days. And I oversee the faith-based homes in the city as well as our long-term care sites in Carbon and Placentia. Over the years, I have lived for a number of years in Labrador and had significant contact with the Indigenous communities in the area where I lived. For 5 years, I lived in Africa, in the nation of Zambia. And in Zambia, there were 73 tribes actually that made up the nation. And I found it very interesting in my Labrador and African experience that the Indigenous and African communities where I lived placed a very high value upon the elderly. Their opinions were sought, they were highly respected and valued. And you talk about reverse culture shock when you live overseas for a while and come back to Canada. One of the things that we faced as a family when we returned to Canada, when we talk about reverse culture shock, was that the impact of ageism that you see in Western culture. In long-term care, we have seen explicit examples of that. Meg did talk about some of that. Sometimes you see people, when it comes to the elderly, their opinion, their advice, younger people can just be dismissive of them. Researcher Susan Fisk, I found it interesting that she did some work on the stereotypes that about older people. And she said they often relate to how younger people expect them to behave. And a couple of things she focused in on. She said one stereotype she describes relates to succession. So younger people often assume that, okay, as an older individual, you have had your turn, you've had your day. That can be difficult in the church world as well, where people that have given their lives to help build a faith community get to a certain age. And we see this in long-term care. We have people at Pleasant View Towers that gave their lives to their faith communities. And I don't want to sound harsh, but I'll be realistic. They are in a setting now where they're forgotten. Contribution they have made, while it may have been appreciated in days past, that's something they've been shuffled off the scene now. And many times people are made to feel like that they're just shuffled off the scene. You have had your turn. It's time for somebody else now to step up. And yes, there's a natural progression, succession of things like that. But with ageism, we see sometimes that people almost feel they've been pushed aside. I found it interesting, I think it was last year, there was a video clip of a member of the legislature in Australia. And she was a younger member, and as she was speaking, an older member of the legislature, I guess, was heckling her. And her response to him was just 2 words, "Okay, boomer." And it was meant as an insult. You know, you've had your turn, you've had your day, it's my turn now. And you can see that dismissive attitude that comes across. Meg made reference to some other forms of explicit ageism that is very real. That is the elderly that suffer physical violence, that are the recipients of financial abuse and taken advantage of financially. I have seen this, my parents are both in their 80s, the number of scams that target the elderly. I have seen that time and time again with my own parents. Implicit bias. We don't like to think we're ageist, most of us don't. But when you're driving down the street and you're in a hurry, and you stop at a red light, and the person ahead of you, you can see behind the wheel, has white hair. What do we think? What comes to our mind? Well, hurry up, Get out of the way. Should you be driving? Whereas the insurance industry will tell us that it's not the white-haired person behind the wheel we have to worry about. It's the teenage male that's behind the wheel we really have to worry about. But we see that sort of thing. I always remember a nurse who was involved in long-term care, and she chose long-term care because it was her passion. She had a love for the elderly. And she said, I didn't think I had an ageist bone in my body. But she was working at St. Luke's. It was her very first placement. And she said one day she heard the bell ring, and at St. Luke's prior to COVID, the practice was during meal times, the bell would be rung. Those who could would make their way to the dining hall and serve. Those who could not would be served their meal in the room. So she said the bell rang, and I was walking down the corridor, and I saw what I assumed was a frail little old lady in her wheelchair slowly pushing her way down the hall. She said, I wanted to help her. I walked up to her without asking. I just began to push her wheelchair toward the dining hall, thinking I was doing a good thing. And she said that little old lady turned around and looked at me with fire in her eyes, and she blasted me. She said, how dare you help me without asking first? How dare you think I was so frail and feeble that I needed your assistance? And that nurse said, I have never forgotten that. She said, I learned as I stopped to talk to her that this was her exercise every day. When the bell rang, her exercise was to get to the dining hall and back again. And so for me to do that, she said, I violated her in one sense. She felt that I did. And she said, I never, ever forgot it again. And she said, I realized that day that there was implicit ageism within me that I didn't even know was there. So we do see that a number of years ago, and with this I'll finish. A number of years ago at Pleasant View Towers, a survey was done of the units where residents are fairly cognitively well about their experience in long-term care. Do you feel you have been at the receiving hand of discrimination or ageism or any of that? And some of the responses were surprising. And part of this connects with ableism as well. The seniors who found themselves or find themselves confined to a wheelchair for movement, they said time and time again, yes, we find that if I am being pushed down the corridor or down the unit, and a staff member or a member of the public comes along to speak, they will first make contact, eye contact, with the person who is pushing it. They will first speak to the person who is pushing my chair. They don't look at me. They don't speak to me first. It's like I'm not there. And so we have tried in the training of our chaplaincy team and our staff down there to say we need to be aware of some of these things, the implicit ageism that we may not even be aware of, but that hurts people. And anyway, I'll stop there. I can ramble on for a while, Paul. As you know, you suffered it over 12 weeks, so I'll stop right there.
That was terrific, Paul. And I cannot tell you the smile that was on Nancy Reed's face when you told the story of the person pushing the wheelchair, and she will explain that shortly. But it's interesting that happened, and I was recounting a story to my wife yesterday, and again, it was all done with the greatest of intentions, but maybe, I don't know what day it was, but within the last week, I walked into Coleman's, took the corner, and I'm walking towards getting a cart, and there was a family there, a gentleman and a lady, and a younger child. I don't know, say they're in their 30s, rough guess. So I'm 20 feet from the cart, and this guy turns and goes, "Oh, sir, can I get you a cart?" And I'm like, "No, I'm good. I can get the cart, but I really appreciate your consideration." And I'm walking towards saying, I can't figure out if he suggested that because I have a disability or because I'm 58 and look older than that. So I don't know. It was one or the other. Right? Oh, stop laughing, Dave Peters. I can see that. But it's interesting that those things happen. Thank you very much, Paul. I really appreciate that very, very much. I'm going to go to Nancy Reed now. So Nancy and I have known each other since 2014. We served together on the Provincial Advisory Council on the Status of Persons with Disability. I didn't say it at the beginning, but I do identify as a person with a disability. I was diagnosed at birth with cerebral palsy. And of course now, just last year, I just finished 1 year working directly in the disability community with the Autism Society. So Nancy and I have been there, and as well through, I was her board chair at Coalition for Persons with Disabilities for a few years, and just as friends. So I guess you'll talk a little bit more about from a physical disability point of view, I know, and generally, but the joke that Nancy and I always have, that I always talk about when we talk about implicit bias, is we'll tell a story about our experience. And this reaction will be, and I know your favorite reaction, Nancy, is somebody will look at you and go, "You're such an inspiration." You don't realize how insulting that is, because we're just people trying to live in the world just like anybody else. We're not here to be an inspiration. So that conversation, I think you and I have had, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 times, Nancy. So I wanted to set it up that way and then let you run.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you. I got to say before I start, I'm enjoying this so much. Thank you for this opportunity, because what I'm hearing from the senior consideration, and also, as Lewis spoke around disability as well, there are so many ways that we all have so many similar experiences, and I really appreciate that. As Paul said, Paul and I have known each other for quite some time, and Paul alluded to it, but I am also an individual who identifies as being a person with disabilities. I myself acquired my disability a little late in life, and I now use a manual wheelchair for mobility, and have some other things that are part of my identity, which are kind of just who I am. In addition to that, though, I am the parent of a now 24-year-old young woman who also is a person with multiple disabilities. And our daughter, Hannah, was born with cerebral palsy. And so Paul and I have had many conversations around the CP lens and all of those things as well. But for my daughter, that means that she has physical mobility disability. It means that she has a sensory or communication disability. She is effectively nonverbal, and she has intellectual disabilities as well. And she's the happiest person I know, and she's just an amazing young woman. And so that's part of who I am, part of it. When I, got this opportunity and thinking about it, I realized that I'm not really good at following direction. Paul, you knew that well. And I'm not going to really think about it as terms of implicit versus explicit and all that stuff. What I'll say, though, is that from my, experience in working with our community, with the disability community, and my experience as an individual and as a family, in this world of disability, this wonderful place to live, and I mean that thoroughly. I'm a big supporter of disability culture. From that incredible world, I realized that the greatest barriers that we face are often the attitudinal barriers. Like I said, I am a person with a physical mobility disability and in a wheelchair. If I get to the bottom of a set of stairs, everybody knows there's a barrier there for me. But it's the other barriers that are really much more difficult to comprehend and understand. And I think so often in our culture, we really, we learn unconscious bias and we learn discrimination. I really appreciate what Lewis said about his granddaughters and the differences between two siblings who I'm sure have shared such a common experience together in a family unit, but have two very different ways of interacting or working with a family member who is a person with disabilities. And so it doesn't seem that's a learned thing. So there is a certain amount of disability awareness or hesitation, or whatever words we want to throw in there, built into us as individuals. That's obvious, right? But I think that we can all recognize that there are ways that we as individuals in this society that we live in have opportunities to really change and the way of thinking of people and make people more aware. One little brief story that I want to share with you is that some years ago, I was at my local grocery store, and I'm in my wheelchair, and I've kind of adapted a way to, because I do things that I need to do. And I've adapted a way to use a regular shopping cart with one hand, and using the other caster and footrest of my wheelchair to kind of manipulate the cart, and I can kind of go through the aisles and do things independently that way. And so I was going through, and I was coming to the end of an aisle, and there was a young child with her mother, and she's sitting in the cart at the top, and this little girl makes eye contact with me. She was just a really friendly person, and the little girl, as I said, makes eye contact, and she goes, "Oh, hi," and I responded, "Hi," and I'm going around the corner as I'm responding. We were just passing each other, and I heard her, and she was just outside of my ability to respond further. She looks, she says to her mom, she says, "Mommy, I didn't know people in those things could talk." And it was this moment of, oh, I really wanted to be able to continue that conversation with her, because most likely she's an individual that had had experience with people or with a person in a wheelchair who was nonverbal for whatever reason. Most likely that was her experience. She's 3, maybe 4. And I would have loved to have taken that opportunity to say, "Hi, sweetheart, listen, why don't we talk about," give that opportunity to shed, I guess, to open the opportunity for her to have a better other learning. Hopefully her mom took that opportunity. But we all, in our everyday lives as individuals, if it's a professional space, if it's a personal space, we can all have those teachable moments. Sometimes I've had that moment with a kid who's looking at my wheelchair and says, "Why are you in that thing?" Or, "What do you do?" And I love to talk to a little boy who's fascinated with the wheels of his wheelchair and really talk about, "Well, my legs don't work the same as yours, but you know what I get to do because I have this chair? This gives me we talk about it in ways, and it really engages with people, and hopefully avoids some of the fear or the anxiety that we grow into, I think, as we get older, if we're not given an opportunity to change that thinking. I'm not sure who it was, but somebody, maybe Paul, in the session this morning, also spoke to the care provider being spoken to first, and not the person in the chair, or that individual. We see that so often. I remember in my early days, I had viral meningitis encephalitis in 2005, and after a couple of weeks on life support, and by literally the grace of God and just a miracle, I'm alive today. And I came out of that space with a whole new perception and opportunity to live and live differently. And I'm so thankful for that. But early in those recovery days, my husband and I were at the Avalon Mall, and I'm sitting at one of the meal places, and I've got a tray in front of me, and I'm going through, and my husband is 2 steps behind me, and we've got a daughter who's been in a wheelchair from birth. So at this point, we're kind of used to wheelchairs and stuff, and he knows me, and I'm as independent as I can be. So I look sick, I look gross, I look odd, but I'm sitting in the chair, and I've got a tray in front of me, and I'm sitting in front of the lady trying to get my order filled. And this young woman behind the counter makes eye contact almost. She glances down at me, and then she looks immediately back to my husband and says, "Sir, what can I help you with?" And he looks at her and he said, "I don't think I'm next in line," right? And so it's those moments of, we all have the opportunity sometimes to just gently nudge people toward a different way of thinking. But I'll also say that we all have the opportunity to look at ourselves as well. And again, somebody spoke to it already, is that bias that we all actually hold. We all have perceptions. We need to have perceptions of people in order to move in this world. We need to do that. But we have to challenge ourselves to see if those are actually real, or if they're just things that we think of. And so I challenge all of us to do that every day. And I also will say in closing, because I know we don't have a huge amount of time, that if you don't know how to respond to something, or if you're looking internally and you notice that maybe your thinking is off or you're unsure of something, there are people always in the community that you can reach out to, that you can speak to. As Paul said, I'm the executive director with the Coalition of Persons with Disabilities. I also work with a number of network organizations in this province, and there's some great resources here. There are real opportunities for real learning. When we have questions, if it's from a professional place, if it's a personal place, if we just don't know where to go, I can tell you that the answers are found in the communities that we live in. And I'm there, but I certainly don't know it all, but there are real resources out there for us all. And I know that that's the same with our seniors. I've worked with seniors, and there are so many other individuals in our communities. So often it's just a matter of speaking to somebody with that identity and saying, you know, what does this mean? Where do we go from here? I'm going to leave it there. But anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you. I want you to address one thing for me before you move on, because you can speak of this really well. And Paul talked about the lady in the seniors home and the person pushing the wheelchair. Explain why you don't touch somebody's wheelchair.
That wheelchair is a part of my body. Without that wheelchair, I don't move. I say I'm in my wheelchair. If somebody takes that, you're taking me. I compare it to, if you see, everybody in this room has been in a parking lot. You're going into Dominion, and you see this elderly lady, and she's struggling to walk across the parking lot, or you think that she might be uncomfortable, or she's, being slower than needed. Nobody's going to run over there, pick her up in your arms, and run into the store and drop her off. By taking my wheelchair, by taking control of my wheelchair, by actually pushing it, that's effectively what you're doing. The wheelchair is an extension of my body. I don't look at my wheelchair in any handicap. My wheelchair is independence. And if you put your hands on my hand, on my push, on my handlebars, or my whatever you call them, I don't even know what to call. If you put your hands there and you push it, you are taking control of me, and nobody takes control of my body.
Thank you. I also want to thank you for reminding me about something that I didn't speak to. And it was something that as an adult, I had to learn because I wasn't there. And you were one of the people who taught me. And you talked about disability culture and understanding the beauty of disability culture, and understanding that, at least from where I sit, I'm lucky to have a disability because it gives me a different lens in the world that I can share with other people. I'm not unlucky because I have a disability. And understanding disability culture from that point of view is very freeing. So thanks for bringing that up very, very much. And thank you for your contribution. As a summation, I'm going to turn to Dave Peters now, who's been actively listening. And I've known Dave, oh dear, 40 some years from university through. And I know Dave to be a very deep thinking individual. He's a sociologist. And as well as a fellow commerce grad, and he has been involved in delivering some education around disability and awareness. I've had the privilege of guest lecturing at for him a couple of times. So Dave, I just want your thoughts on what you heard this morning, or this afternoon, sorry. And as a person who we're the same age, so I'm going to say is neither a senior nor as a person who identifies as a person with disability, what your thoughts are.
Thanks so much, Paul. This is a wonderful opportunity, and I learned a lot myself today. Thank you to the other panelists. It's been a really fantastic session. And again, thank you, Paul, for guest lecturing for me. I did teach Introduction to Disability Studies at CNA last semester. And this semester, you wouldn't know this, but this is so serendipitous. I'm teaching healthy aging
Oh, wow.
this semester. So the two, obviously, from a sociologic perspective, are linked because I remember this amazing quote that someone from the disabled community did a sermon at Cochrane Street a couple of years ago. And she said something that just blew my mind. She said, "We are all temporarily abled." Yeah, and so, you know, when we look at, I'm doing some prep. Tomorrow is the first day of classes, and looking at self-reports of elderly people in Canada, the General Social Survey. People between the ages of 65 and 74, 75% say I'm abled and healthy. Those 75 plus, only 35% report that. So, you know, as we age, we are more likely to experience disability. Stepping it up for several tens of thousands of feet in sociology, I've got this out because tomorrow we'll be using this in class. These are my scales, and in each of the scales we have a word. This is agency, and this is structure. And this is social life, right? In society, we are implored by our gender, social class, geography, and other characteristics to perform in certain ways. We're expected to be normal. And when we don't, so that's the force of structure on us, that society suggests we should act in particular ways. But of course, we are free. We have agency, and we are free to deviate from those role expectations, and often do, in ways that can be exemplary or bring stigma. So the scale of justice, the scale of society, is all about the agency and structure, and both matter, frankly. And when Paul Grimes mentioned his experience around the what I call the New Eskasoni, Pleasantville Towers, this really resonated with me sociologically, because when we talk about socialization, it's a lifelong process. When we think of socialization to the layperson in introductory sociology classes, you know, people think of raising kids, but there's a lot more to it than that. Socialization is a lifelong process by which we learn social skills and become something, or the person we are changes over time. It's a lifelong process. Senior socialization is a real important part of our life course. And the signal characteristic of senior socialization is the shedding of roles. We are no longer the professional we were. Our intimate partner passes, so we're no longer married. As we become disabled, we no longer are able to go to church or bridge club or plan vacations. This can be a very difficult time of life, of course, as we are we're reminiscing, in essence, with some exceptions, of course. Grandparenting and the explosion of fitness clubs for seniors are two exceptions to that. So aging, like disability, are circumstances that carry both stigma, a spoiled identity, if we can say, and also empathy. It invites empathy, acts of philanthropy, and kindness too. And I think this is an important part of it, part of the social response to persons who are aged, who are disabled. We see a whole universe of stigma and acts of kindness. And this is an important part of it. And two things I wanted to mention at the end of my comments. As I went through last semester, which was a real panic, thank God for Paul and my other guest lecturers, because I came from this really from, as Paul mentioned, I thank God, you know, I've been healthy most of my life and able-bodied, and not that, again, that is in any way puts me above or below people who are disabled, but I have no experience in it, and it was very intimidating to approach this, and I felt inadequate to do it early in the semester, for sure. But one of the things, two conditioning factors that I think when we look at the social response to persons who are elderly and persons who are in the disabled community, the first is the stage in the life course. And the example I like to tell students about this stage of life course, if you go to Coleman's and you see an elderly person in a wheelchair, a very elderly person, your normal response might be, my God, look, she is so healthy. Look at her. What a superstar. You know, you see your nan and she's walking with a cane or whatever. It's like, wow, she is rocking this day. And then you go to the next aisle and you see your son's old school friend who's in the same condition and is 40 years younger. Your natural response is, ooh, what happened? So this, where you perceive the person's stage of the life course can really condition your response to them. And also risk-taking behavior. And this was a really important and amazing part of the curriculum last semester, Paul. We did a look at 2 case studies. One was Jonathan Pitra, the butterfly child. He passed in 2017, Ottawa Senator, super fan, was born with epidermolysis bullosa, one of the most horrifying disabilities. He had skin that was like a butterfly's wings. And so most of these people who have EB pass by age 30 because of sepsis. They're quite prone to getting infections through their skin. Poor Jonathan, his day was filled with his mom bathing him, removing bandages and placing bandages on. It was just, you know, the lack of his ability to control that situation. He was thrust into it without any agency at all. And as such, our natural response is just, our heart breaks for this boy and people like him. And then we did a case study of Eric Legrand, who's a quadriplegic, social activist, African-American male, and he was injured in a football game. He played college football at Rutgers, and there was a kickoff, and he was running for a tackle, and he was tripped and ran head on into the ball carrier and was paralyzed from the neck down. Clearly, again, you know, wow, you approach the person with love and empathy, but there is, and he acknowledged that he knew he took a risk by playing a violent contact sport. Not that it's just, so we look at stage of life course and risk-taking behavior, because obviously we talked about, you know, the dangerous driver being the young man, you know, cliff diving, dangerous driving, drunk driving, playing contact sports. These are risk-taking behaviors. And when disability happens in that case, there's a little bit of an asterisk on the empathy of the social response, just a conditioning factor, something that might mitigate or provide nuance to the social response to people who are disabled. So that's kind of a little, you know, rambling sociologic commentary on this field. Thank you for listening, and thank you for the opportunity, Paul, to participate. This has been an absolute blast. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I just, before we sum things up, I just want to ask for anyone who's online if there are any questions that they wanted to ask. Okay, hearing none, I want to thank Meg and Paul and Louis and Nancy and Dave for taking the time today to be with us. The insights I knew would be deep, and they all were, and they were all really, really on point. And I really appreciate you sharing that with our community and with each other. Dave is right. There's so many similarities between the disability community and the seniors community. And, you know, I think you used the word, we're all temporarily able, Dave, but there's a reality that you're either born with a disability like I was, or you acquire it. Nancy, you talked about you acquired your disability. Many people acquire their disability as they age, which wasn't your experience, I know, but many people, in many people's cases, they do. So there are a lot of parallels, and we talked about those, the parallels between the intellectual disability community and the neurodiversity community. So we can all learn tremendously from each other. I do have a hand up. I think Sarah Norman has a question.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, I did have a question. As somebody who grew up in a older family, majority of my aunts and uncles are late 60s or late 70s. I'm just seniors is something that is a passion for me, because I've spent so many time with so many. I'm just wondering, what programs are available to someone like me, a youth or a young person, young adults or whatever, who can get involved, be connected with seniors who may not have as much family around or no family at all, or anything like that, who that, we could be a support or a friend to any of them.
Meg, I think you're best qualified to address that question.
Thank you for that question. I'm going to suggest, Sarah, that you give me a call, and we have a database at Seniors NL that and some volunteer opportunities and documentation that I can share with you. So if you want to give me a call at Seniors NL, we're all working from home right now, but 7372333, and leave a message for me, and I'll give you a shout.
Thank you, Meg. James, you have a question?
Well,
And then Barb.
And then Barb. Okay, sorry, Barb, I didn't see your hand. Sorry. Go ahead, James.
Okay, my question is this: as a faith community, we strive to be inclusive, and yet we know that we are not always. Any, say, low-hanging fruit to help us be more inclusive of folks in regard to both age and ability?
Who wants that one?
I'm going to jump in. It's Nancy. And, I guess there's no one answer. I'm going to come from my own perspective, being an individual who requires that physical access to actually get into a space. And so many of our buildings in this province, and of course, buildings, that would be used by our faith community, are no exception to that in terms of them being not always available to persons with mobility disorder. And so if there's an opportunity for you to either currently have a space that is accessible, physically accessible, at least for an entrance to the main areas of use in the building and the building itself, I'd encourage you to celebrate that publicly, to put it on your social media feed, whatever you have, however you would portray anything about your particular community itself, but to say, by the way, we are accessible, or we are available, or we welcome people. We're sure that we're available in that way. I'll go another step and say, if you're not sure if you're physically accessible, again, give me a call at the coalition office, because I can help you, I guess, determine whether or not you're physically accessible to individuals. And so in the same way, if you're trying to reach any particular population, if you know you own that already, celebrate it publicly and say, we're available, or my daughter loves to go to church, and in that space, there are a number of individuals who know her well. And like Lewis mentioned, there are many people in that congregation who will go out of their way to actually speak to her. So having that welcoming force inside that congregation will help ensure that people want to be able to come back. So if you have those champions, if you want, within your congregation, once you get people there, that really helps people feel that warmth, not just in words, but in really being able to experience it in that way. I'll leave it there.
Awesome. Yep. Thank you, Nancy. That's fantastic.
James, I just want to comment from the neurodiversity side for a second. And it's that understanding of autism, ADHD, OCD, and all different neurodiverse conditions, of which cerebral palsy is one. If you look at the example, and there's a book written about this, a book called Autism Includes Me, and that's what the group is about, what has been done in the community for BASC, which is considered the most autism-friendly community in Canada. And the fact that they provide training to businesses and to municipalities and others about when a person who presents with certain characteristics, and they might be autism or, Lewis referenced intellectual disabilities, how to address a person and whatnot, and how to react when their social reaction isn't what you expect. The more people that can accept the fact that this person's going to sit over there in the corner, and in the middle of the service they might make a noise that doesn't seem appropriate to everybody else, but that's okay, and nobody pays attention to it, and everybody's fine. And or if a seizure happens for an individual, that there's people there that will sincerely want to help, and not just react or stare or rubberneck or whatnot. I think that's a really important part of being a welcoming community. And we haven't addressed it in this group, but the whole area of mental health and addictions, and that being such a big part of the disability community right now, understanding that community a bit more, and having the tools available to help should something happen, and to understand where they are and in their journey is really, really important as well. Did anybody else in the panel want to address James's point?
Meg, you're on mute.
I'm just very quickly going to jump in on that also and talk about language. So language is really, really important as well. And so from an ageism perspective, it is one of the ways that the World Health Organization and many other organizations that they're encouraging to come up with language that can be shared with communities, so that by changing the language that you use, you change that sense of welcome or not as well. And I'm sure that applies to much more than just ageism. But that is actually something very specific that can be done, and there's a lot of work being done on that now.
I just wanted to briefly say something.
Yeah, absolutely.
I joined the panel because I qualify on both counts, age and disability. And it was very interesting to hear all of the speakers very knowledgeable academically and experientially. And I want to be very brief because it's gone on longer than I anticipated. But I have my own experiences. I would have liked to have had an opportunity to share them, but I won't share them now because it's really too late. But it was, I was very impressed by all of the panelists. Thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye.
Thanks, Barb, very much.
Thanks, Barb.
Meg, Sarah Norman was wondering if you could give that phone number out again. On mute.
On mute.
Yeah.
Story of my life. 737-2333. Great dog.
I was going to say, and thank you to Avalon for joining in there.
That's why I'm muting again.
We have gone a bit longer than I promised everyone, so I will take this moment to take our leave. Thank you so much to the panelists for taking your time today. With this amazing day would not have been possible, obviously, without each and every one of you and the perspectives you bring. Thanks to all who have attended, and have a wonderful Sunday afternoon, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Bye.
Paul.
Take care.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank
Thanks
you.
to everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul. It was great.
Bye.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you all.